Lisa Curtis is a senior fellow and director of the Indo-Pacific Security program at the Center for a New American Security. She's also a former CIA analyst, joins me now from Washington. Delighted you could make it, Lisa. This report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan reconstruction, pretty concerning on a lot of levels, all sorts of concerns about what would happen if the US stuck to that May 1 withdrawal. Now, the Biden administration is reportedly looking at a 6-month delay, but what do you see as the major risks of a precipitous pullout?
Well, yes, I think if the U.S. were to go down to zero by the May 1st deadline that's in the Doha Agreement, even though, of course, the Taliban has not lived up to its end of the agreement, which is they haven't reduced violence and they still have links to Al Qaeda. But if the U.S. were to fully withdraw U.S. troops, we're likely to see the Taliban retake the country probably within about a year's time, and the reemergence of a terrorist safe haven. The U.S. would lose global credibility, not to mention the empowerment of a generation of terrorists that would likely converge on Afghanistan. And we would likely have to send back in troops within a few years, just like we had to do in Iraq when ISIS rose in the country in 2014.
You make great points there. I mean, when it comes to the Taliban, and it's all very noble to talk of power-sharing governments and continuation of democracy and women's rights and so on. But, correct me if I'm wrong, Taliban actions and statements on the ground give every indication they're still committed to Sharia law and rule by force. Why should we have any faith they would respect the changes made to civil society since their overthrow post 9/11, rather than just, as you point out, take over again?
I think that's right. We've seen no indication that the Taliban is interested in a genuine peace process over the last year. In fact, what we heard from the Special Inspector General last week when he testified before Congress is that violence levels by the Taliban are actually higher, or were higher in 2020 than they were in 2019. And the Taliban has been targeting civilians, human rights workers, journalists. Those targeted killings have also increased. And as I mentioned, the Taliban have not broken from Al Qaeda. We see that Al Qaeda training is still happening in Taliban areas. So we've seen no indication that they're living up to any kinds of the commitments that they made in the Doha Agreement.
I was in Kabul just after the Taliban were thrown out post 9/11 and saw firsthand the impacts that their rule had had on women, children's education, so many other things, from the music to the film industry even. If there is a pullout, how responsible would the US be for, as you point out, in a year or two or three, the country would be run as it was pre 9/11?
Well, I think that is definitely a concern. There have been a lot of changes, as you said. Women are engaged in all parts of society. They're going to school, they're working, they're running NGOs. But unfortunately, that could quickly change if the Taliban were to come back. And I point to the situation a few years ago when the Taliban were able to take over the provincial capital of Kunduz for 2 weeks. And the first thing they did was target women who were working in the NGOs that were working on women's rights, healthcare issues, etc. So that tells you something. And I don't think we've seen a great deal of change in the Taliban's attitudes towards women. And anybody who's been participating in sort of the new Afghanistan, who has been working in the media, who's been part of the legislature, the elected government, even the workers in the government. So I think this is something that's a real problem, and it's a real threat.
The thing is, the Afghan government has become so reliant on outside money and help. I mean, the training and security offered by US forces, but also the manpower and expertise provided by thousands literally of contractors. I remember in the Cigar report, they said that if that support went, Afghanistan's Air Force would be grounded within months through lack of maintenance and ability. That's just one example. How dependent is the Afghan state on the foreign presence and, crucially, money? And is it fair to say that there are no good options for the US here?
Well, I think the Afghan security forces have improved their capabilities quite a bit, and they are quite an effective force that they could stand up for a while, I think, in the absence of U.S. support. And it might help if the U.S. were to withdraw troops from the country but continue financial support. That would certainly help the Afghan forces. But you're right in terms of maintaining equipment and the Air Force, that would certainly be a problem. They certainly do rely on U.S. airstrikes, which we have continued to conduct when needed. So that would be a major loss for them. And that's why I think it's important for the U.S. to keep a small force presence there to support the Afghans, to backstop the peace process. There is a chance we can continue to encourage the Taliban to stay in the peace talks. We do have points of leverage. They would like their leaders to be delisted from the UN sanctions list. Also, some of the leaders in Doha have enjoyed the sort of international legitimacy that they've gotten through the talks. So I think there is a way to keep a small force presence in the country, but also keep the peace talks going.
A crucial few months ahead for Afghanistan and the gains that have been made. Lisa Curtis, got to leave it there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.